I thank my pastor for the opportunity once again to stand behind the holy desk as he celebrates his mother's 70th birthday, in case you wondered where he was. In a few days, we too will celebrate the bounty of Thanksgiving with friends and family and way too much food. And we will perform the familiar rituals, the gathering, the blessing, the feasting. And everything will be fine unless you fly on a plane or drive to the airport or go to a ball game or go to the mall or go to the grocery store. Because when you go to those places, you're going to see a lot of security guards, and there might be some police, and there might be some bomb-sniffing dogs, and there might be some automatic weapons there. And when you look at the people who are there, you may see maybe a few nervous glances, some people looking over their shoulder. Because this year there is an uninvited guest at the Thanksgiving table, and that is fear. Fear of attack, fear of others, fear of the future. It's hard to be thankful when you're afraid. I like the way John Buchanan puts it. Fear is the enemy of life. It's hard to love when you're afraid. It's hard to love anything passionately when you're afraid. And it's impossible to be joyful about anything when you're afraid. The specter of terrorism is hovering in the air. The names of those places which have been touched by evil that we see on our TV screens are a litany of pain. Paris, Mali, Syria, Kenya, Egypt, Turkey, Lebanon, Nigeria. But there are other cities closer to home which have also been touched by evil. Cities like Ferguson, Missouri, Charleston, South Carolina, Chicago, Baltimore, Minneapolis. They are also suffering. And everywhere else, it seems that trust has decreased and anxiety has increased. What are Christians to do in such a time? Can we just go on with business as usual? Should we? Can we celebrate in our city when we know there are so many other people who are suffering? This is not some sort of abstract metaphysical concept of evil that I'm talking about. This is an evil that spills blood and takes life. Evil causes suffering, and suffering challenges our Christian faith. Why do bad things happen to good people? How can any good come out of suffering? How can we even respond to evil? I'm reminded of the words of the writer Charles Dickens. He opened his novel, A Tale of Two Cities, with the words, "It was the best of times. It was the worst of times." Dickens used these words to criticize his own society, a society obsessed with developing its economic and military power at the expense of social justice. It was the time of the Industrial Revolution, a time when the rich were getting richer and the poor were being left behind. His country, England, was a great colonial power, but its cities were polluted, its moral fabric was decaying, and many of its people were living a hand-to-mouth existence. The machine age provided great wealth, but at a great cost. Many people worked in dirty, unsafe conditions for slave wages, and he said it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. This situation may sound familiar to us. If you were here last week, you heard Pastor Daniel from Covenant Pres point out that Austin itself has more economic inequality than any other city in the country. That means that the gap between rich and poor is more extreme in Austin than in any other city, and it is growing. We've been riding high in Austin for a while now. We are the fastest growing city in the country. We add over 100 people every day. No, it's not 300 like you would, just 100. Seems like 300. We've been on everybody's top 10 list of places to live for years. Now you and I will be witness to a great social experiment. Does this inequality mean that Austin is two cities or one? One city for the wealthy and another one for everybody else? I mean, we're proud of what we've accomplished, but we're concerned about what it's doing to our city. Part of us wants to celebrate, but part of us is a little worried. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. And in the face of this kind of evil, we are challenged to find a way to respond. The theologian James Cone pointed out the relationship between faith and the ability to fight against evil. He said, the Christian answer to suffering is both practical and spiritual. We solve the mystery of evil's existence by fighting it. And faith is only real to the degree that it endows us with the courage to fight. We need courage to fight against fear and evil. Christians are not courageous because we are stronger or meaner or richer or better or smarter than other people. We have courage because of our faith in God's justice and God's righteousness. If there is no justice, there is no hope. And if there is no hope, then our suffering has no meaning and cannot be redeemed. And if suffering has no meaning, then all of us should be cowards. We want safety for ourselves, for our children. But we who call ourselves Christians are always being called into unsafe situations, into broken communities, broken relationships. Tell me, when was Jesus safe? Born to at-risk parents, too poor, too young. As a child, hunted by King Herod's killers. Raised as a refugee in Egypt. As an adult, a target for the scribes and the Pharisees. Then betrayed and executed. When was Jesus safe? We're not called to safety, but to service. And that service sometimes puts us at risk. So we need courage to face that fear. Churches need courage, just like people do. Because fear affects churches the same way it affects people. It intimidates us, it limits us, it makes us neurotic. Churches become afraid of losing their members, afraid that people will stop giving, afraid of other people coming to the church. Everybody wants their church to be big and powerful and influential, not realizing that it's not the size of the church that matters, it's the size of Christ in the church. Amen. And this search for meaning in our lives always carries us beyond our own selves into the lives of other people. In the same way, the church has to reach beyond itself into the lives of other people in order to find its meaning. Isaiah found that meaning at a critical time, the year that King Uzziah died. This scripture speaks to us from almost 3,000 years ago when the Hebrews in the land of Judah were coming to the end of a long period of prosperity and peace. But the signs of danger were all around. They were threatened by the Assyrians to the east and the Egyptians to the west. The great King Uzziah, who had ruled for 52 years, had died. And at the beginning of his reign, God was blessing Uzziah and his kingdom. But as the years went by, all of that power seemed to go to the king's head, and he became arrogant. One day he entered the temple and tried to burn some incense to the Lord, which is something that only the priests were allowed to do. And because of this arrogance, the Lord struck him with the most dreaded disease of the ancient world, leprosy, on his forehead, so that anybody who saw his face would know of his guilt. Now, under Jewish law, anybody who had leprosy was unclean and had to be removed from the rest of society. So for the rest of his life, King Uzziah had to live alone outside his own palace. The great king no longer able to sit on his throne, no longer able to go into the house of the Lord to worship, no longer able to be with his people. For all of his might and power, King Uzziah ended up as an outcast in his own kingdom. For Uzziah, it was the best of times, and it was the worst of times. And now Uzziah was dead, and the kingdom was at risk. And neither is God happy with the kingdom of Judah. If you read the first 5 chapters of the book of Isaiah, it's an indictment of the Hebrew people. Let me give you a little sample. Stop bringing your meaningless offerings. Your incense is detestable to me. New moon, Sabbath, and convocations. I cannot bear your evil assemblies. This is God speaking to his people. Your new moon festivals and your appointed feasts, my soul hates. They have become a burden to me. I am weary of bearing them. When you spread your hands out in prayer, I will hide my eyes from you. Even if you offer many prayers, I will not listen. Your hands are full of blood. Wash and make yourselves clean. Take your evil deeds out of my sight. Stop doing wrong. Learn to do right. That is one kind of whipping. And it is this critical moment when Isaiah receives this remarkable vision of God sitting on the throne of heaven, high and lifted up in the King James Version, surrounded by these mysterious flying critters called seraphs. And they are shouting back and forth to one another so loud that the walls and the doors are shaking, and there's fires and there's smoke. It's like a Beyonce concert. But instead of cheering or applauding, Isaiah is frightened. He's scared. He realizes this is about judgment, not revelation. Now, to the Hebrews, if you saw God, you were dead. So Isaiah is thinking, well, this is it, folks. I've seen the Lord. I'm a goner. And he knows his people are just as bad off as he is, right? They haven't got a chance. But we can see that at the same time, God was pulling back from his people in anger. God was preparing a message through God's prophet Isaiah, the coming of the Messiah, the one who would defeat death and redeem the suffering of the people of Israel. And then Isaiah was not afraid. One of the problems about having ministers who've been to seminary is that as a congregation, you always hear a lot of stories about, oh, when I went to seminary this and seminary that. It's like old war stories. You get kind of tired of that for a while, but I digress. When I went to seminary for 3 years, I realized it was a great strain on our family for all the time that it took up. So I made a deal with my wife. I said, look, honey, when I graduate, if I do graduate and survive, we'll take a vacation anywhere you want to go. Anywhere you want to go. She says, I want to take a cruise. I want to go on a cruise ship. We've never been on a cruise before. I said, fine. So we scheduled the cruise. And it's supposed to be, how it works is that you fly from here to Miami, and then you get on a bus down to South Miami, and you get on the boat there, and the boat goes out for a week and takes you back. And so it was the week that we were going to leave, and we were going to leave on a Friday. And it was Tuesday morning, and our neighbor called us, it was about 8 o'clock, our neighbor called us on the phone and said, you have to turn on your TV. And we turned on the TV, and there was a very large building there that looked like it was on fire. And we were sitting there watching. We didn't know where it was or what was going on. Then we saw a plane come through the frame of the TV and hit the other building. Yeah, it was 9/11. And so for the rest of the day, the whole world was upside down. Right? Nobody knew anything that was going on. We called the travel service. They didn't know what was going on. Every airport was closed. Every plane was on the ground. And we began to wonder whether we were going to be able to make this vacation or not. And on Thursday, they announced, okay, we're going to open the airports on Thursday. So we're out of the airport like 7 o'clock in the morning. Well, our flight's been canceled. But we found another carrier that could get us to Miami. And so we made it to Miami, got down to South Miami. And how it works is that they put you in a bus and they take you out to the pier. Now, if you've never seen one of these ships before, they are huge in scope. I mean, it's 1,000 feet long. That's more than 3 football fields long, right? 20 stories tall. It's up like a floating city almost. And they take you down to the dock, And you go up to the side of the ship, and it's so big you can't really even see the ship. All you see is this big white wall going up in front of you. You can't even see the top of it. And they load you onto the ship through this little tiny hole, throw you through the hole. And we got on the ship. When we got on the ship, we thought, oh, now we can relax. No. That we're sitting on the ship, and the Coast Guard has boats going up and down the ship, the length of the ship like this, because they're afraid somebody was going to swim up and try to attach a bomb to the boat or something like that. So we're going, are we going to get out of here or not? Finally, we make it out onto the water, and we think, okay, now we can relax. So my wife and I are touring the inside of the ship. And this thing is, it's got gymnasiums, it's got casinos, it's got bars, it's got a library. Never did quite figure that one out. A bowling alley, ridiculous stuff. And everything is brightly lit. And we finally said, okay, let's go out on deck. And we opened this door to go out onto the deck of the ship. But we stepped out on the deck and closed the door and turned around. And it was the darkest dark I think I'd ever seen in my life. It was like the breath just got sucked out of me. It's like walking into a cave or something. There was no moon, no stars, nothing. Right? You couldn't see where the edge of the deck was. We were afraid to walk. You might step off the darn thing. And so we run back inside the ship, and we find a steward, and we say, look, there's something terribly, terribly wrong here. There's no light anywhere on the outside of the ship. He says, no, the captain has given an order. We are running without lights because we're afraid that someone might try to attack the ship. And I thought, that is the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. This thing is like a floating island. And here we are running without our lights, thinking that we're going to hide this thing. Nobody's going to see us or know where we are. All the ship, all of its 3,000 passengers, 2,000 crew, all of its technology, all of its power. And we're trying to hide the darn thing and act like we're not there. And I thought, there's something terribly ironic here. Now is not the time for Christians to be running with their lights off. Now is the time for us to turn our lights on, okay? I mean, now is not the time for you to be afraid that someone's going to be offended by finding out that you're a Christian, right? Now is not the time to be afraid to stand up or speak out when you see something that you know is not right. I can tell you, look, the church is not perfect. But we cannot hide our light for fear of darkness. We are the biggest thing out there. We are saved, sealed, and seated in the heavenly places. We have the power of the Holy Spirit. We're elected, selected, and chosen. We have the greatest religious tradition in the history of the world. A tradition that shaped history, art, literature, politics, law, music, and architecture for 2,000 years, a tradition that has brought us through slavery, civil war, Jim Crow, segregation, discrimination, brutality. That's going to bring us through this mess right now too. But we're afraid for someone to know that we're a Christian during a time when the world needs us more than ever. You and I are on the battleship of faith, but we're acting like we're on the SS Minnow. Paul says God does not give us the spirit of fear, but a spirit of power, of love, and of self-control. Boy, do we need all those three things right now. That night on the ship, we were running with our lights off. We should have turned on every light on the ship, right? We missed a chance to make a statement. Here we are, and we are not afraid. Not because we're so brave, but because the world needs us so badly. Now is not the time for us to be afraid or ashamed. We have to recognize terrorism and call it what it is. It's evil. Some people want to call it other names, religious war, culture clash. Look, if calling it evil isn't bad enough for you, then all those other things don't make any much difference anyway. Make no mistake, terrorism is evil. And evil must always be fought. But let's be careful about how we fight. If we bow to the temptation to hate, then we give the terrorists what they desire most: our anger, our suspicion, and our fear. But we must do more than simply withhold our anger. We must be about the things that build up God's kingdom. We already have the only weapon we need to utterly destroy terrorism. which is the love of God. So we do not return evil for evil, but we overcome evil with good. The real problem for Christians is not that we're going to demand blood, but that we will go into a shell, that we will pull back from engaging with people from other cultures or other religions, to be suspicious of our neighbors and afraid of the stranger. The season of the coming of Christ is almost here. Let's not miss it because we were hiding in our bunker with the lights turned off. I was watching the CBS Evening News this week, and they ran a story from a French TV network. Maybe you saw this, it was Tuesday. And it showed an interview with a young boy and his father. And they were in front of one of the sites of the terrorist attack in Paris. In fact, they were in front of the Bataclan nightclub. It's a club very much like the clubs we have here in Austin, where 89 mostly young people were killed by terrorists. And the day after the attack, people started coming to the site. Hundreds of people, and they were laying down flowers on the ground outside of the club. And they were taking candles and lighting them and setting them on the ground. And some people were praying, and some people were talking, and some people were crying. And the interviewer knelt down to this young boy and his father. This boy is maybe 6 years old. And the interviewer crouches down and sticks the microphone in his face and says, "Do you understand what has happened here?" And it's all in French, so you're reading the subtitles as it's going by. And the little boy says, "Yes, they're really, really mean. Bad guys are not very nice. And we have to be careful because we may have to take houses." And the father is behind the boy. He pats the boy and he says, "No, we don't have to move away. Paris is our home." And the kid starts to argue with him, right? "But these are really bad guys, Daddy." And the father says, "Well, there's bad guys everywhere." And the boy says, "They have guns, they can shoot us, and they're really, really mean, Daddy." And the father says, "It's okay. They may have guns, but we have flowers." And the boy looks at him and he says, "But flowers don't do anything." And the father says, "Of course they do. Look at all these people putting down flowers. It's to fight against guns." And the little boy looks over at the flowers and he says, "It's to protect?" And the father says, "Exactly." And he says, "The candles too?" And his father says, "It's to remember the people who were gone yesterday." And the little boy turns back around to the interviewer and says, "The flowers and the candles are here to protect us." And the interviewer asked the little boy, "Do you feel better now?" And the little boy said, "Yes, I feel better now." And I thought about my old pastor, Reverend James E. Obey Sr., St. James Obey, they used to call him, who said that the best definition of God he ever heard was that God is life and light and love. And I thought, the flowers, life. And the candles, light. And I thought, the love that bound the father and the child together, the love that covered the father and protected the child, the love that brought the flowers and the candles together to create an altar of anguish, the love that is poured out on all who are suffering in every corner of the world is the same love that's poured out over you and poured out over me, over their country and my country, and yes, even the ones who did this terrible deed. The love that allows us to say, we will not be afraid. We will not run away. We will stand and fight with the spiritual weapons that God has provided. With forgiveness, with mercy, with love. The child in us is afraid, and the adult wants to reassure, but the love that they share and share with others is the love that shatters every fear and redeems the world. Our lives, like flowers, they grow, they blossom, they return to the earth. Our light shines into all the dark places of this world. We need protection, but we need love more. I believe that whenever people choose love over hate, and wherever people stand up for justice and mercy and healing, God is working in that place. And we should help that. We should nurture that and help it to grow. Pray for it. Plan for it. Pay for it if you have to. It's worth it. The kingdom of God is worth investing in, believe me. It's our choice which city we want to live in. A city torn by strife and hatred, or a city that's held together with grace and mercy. When evil comes, when the child in me is afraid, and the adult tries to be rational, I remember the love that binds both parent and child and the world together. And then, like the little boy, I feel better. It's okay. They have guns, but we have flowers. Because of that, we all give thanks. Amen.